Hello again, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the Fantasy Slant, powered by Pro Football Focus. I'm your usual host, Michael Moore, along with our usual co-hosts, Brandon, Marianne Lee, and Mike Tagliere. This evening, we are going to dive really deep into the Pro Football Hall of Fame game last night, all the action that you all missed on the field that we all did too. So get ready for some real deep analysis on that game. But we'll cover news and notes, and then a little later, we are going to get into a Dynasty startup draft that the three of us are partaking in with our various thoughts and concerns and likes and dislikes and all that good stuff. So, but first, as we all know, I do like to lead off with a question. So this edition's question is going to be essentially, what is your guys' number? And by what your number is, don't think dirty, what your number is, how many fantasy leagues you're in. So, Mike, since you were the one that got me and Brandon into this Dynasty startup mess, you can lead off.
The one who got you guys into this mess. Honestly, this year I'm in more than I've ever been because I'm doing football full-time now. Whoa. I'm doing football full-time now, so I'm able to actually focus on the leagues and put everything together. I usually played in about 6 leagues, but this year I have bumped it up, and I'm in 14 leagues right now. So much more than I probably should be because I'm going to be trying to, come game time, I'm going to forget which roster has which player and all that stuff, but
Sure.
It's all good. I mean, I feel like I've done enough research to know, at least I'm prepared for the draft. From there, it's a different story.
Sure. All right, Brandon, you're up. How many leagues are you in this year?
I have literally no idea. And I'm sorry, there's someone walking right outside of my home. Lucy, come on now. Come on, girl. I have a puppy. She's ruining my life.
Because she's barking a lot, so she knows the truth.
She knows. So I just went to my fantasy league and I decided to view my leagues. And currently I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. But 3 of them are MFL 10s. I know I have 4 on Yahoo. I know I have 1 on ESPN and 1 on NFL so far. And I'm doing another draft next Wednesday. So that's.
So we do a lot, and that MFL 10s. I think I have like 40 or 50 MFL 10s. So I needed to cut that out though because I'm about to become official resident of Arizona. So I will not be able to partake in the MFLs anymore.
Sure, that's your story, and you're sticking to it, Mike.
Yeah, it is.
I was in 15 last year, and it was hard. But I will say that I won 5 of them.
Nice.
Okay.
Straight up.
Hey, that's pretty good. I mean, 1/3 of the leagues you're in. That's not bad.
Yeah, 1/3 in 1 year, so that's pretty good. I've won a fantasy league every year except for my first year playing when I play 2nd, 3rd, and 4th. So I at least have one a year that I win. If I don't win one, then my brain will go like.
Well, especially this year, if you're in like 40 of them, then you were
something's
just
gotta
unlucky.
hit.
Yeah.
Something's got it.
But it's hard because I do game day radio on Bleacher Report from 11 to 1, and so I'm doing the injury reports, I'm on air, I'm answering questions, and then I have to set like 16 lineups. And so last year one time I remember Antonio Gates, I didn't quite get to the league that had him in it when he was announced last minute that he wasn't going to play, and it was really unfortunate. But I would like to rein it in, but again, all these industry ones, it's hard to say no.
I was going to say, we all say we want to rein it in, but how many of us have actually said no to discontinuing participation in the league? I know I haven't yet.
That's how I feel. That's how I feel. Yeah. It's hard to say no. Definitely 100%.
God, I feel small compared to you two. I think I'm in like 6 or 8 or something like that.
That was me last year, though.
Good number.
But Mike, you have a full-time job though, right? Outside of this, right?
Well, yeah.
That's what I'm saying. Is Brandon and I are both. Brandon, you're full-time doing this, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's what I'm saying. We're both doing it full time. So, but yeah, last year I think I played in 6, maybe 7 leagues, and so it gets really busy, man.
Well, and when you and again, we'll talk about this later, but when you, Mike, had asked people, hey, I'm looking for some real diehards in Dynasty, I swore it off before this year. I was like, you know what, I'm at my limit. I've spent enough time on it. I don't have that much time on Sunday, leading up to the games. But then, you're but the diehards, and it's well, okay. I can do one more.
Yeah, that's the thing is, I really wanted a league where, and for those of you who didn't hear on Twitter, I put it out there for somebody in the industry. I was like, hey, if you guys are diehards and you want to play in a dynasty that's really active, that, you're the person pestering, the other 12, 14 league mates about a trade all the time, if that's you, I want you in this league. So Moore and Brandon joined this league, and it's a 14-team dynasty league with 38-man rosters, and we're starting 4 wide receivers, 3 running backs, 2 flex, a tight end, a quarterback, and a defense. So it's such deep rosters. We're going to talk about that later, and it's really interesting to see some of the strategies. So I know we all wanted to talk about that. So
yeah, it's interesting, because especially startup and drafts really in general, you get to see sort of what strategy people employ. I mean, it's one thing to just be on top of the waiver wire and injured reserve and all that kind of stuff, but when people have to start fresh, that's when their true colors come out. Let's face it. Yeah. But yes, like you said, Michael, we'll get to that in a bit. But before that, we will get to some news and notes. Actually, first off, I think we wanted to talk about some running backs that were the subject of a lot of chatter this offseason, and they were covered also in the Fantasy 5 on ProFootballFocus.com earlier today. Let's start off with Matt Jones. Matt Jones of the Redskins. He's sort of been handed the starting job, and luckily for him, Arian Foster signed in Miami and not in Washington, so there's little to no competition for carries, though. So I guess my first question is, let's go for you, Brendan. Are you drafting Matt Jones this year?
I mean, I'm not aiming for him.
Endorsement. Perfect.
Who I'm drafting with. I think Matt Jones has one of the widest variants for ADP right now, depending on who's drafting. So if a lot of people are down on him and I can get him really, really late, then sure. But if I have to reach for him like he's a legitimate starter,
so not running back 2 for you.
No.
Okay.
Unless I'm going late, unless I'm like going, really wide receiver heavy and
sure.
he's there. But no, I would prefer not to have him as my second running back. But I think he hasn't gone off the boards, at least in the leagues that I've been in, as a second running back. He's been going more as like a third or fourth, and I think that is okay. I think that is a value. He is the starter. There's no one else there really chomping at the bit yet. The preseason might change that, though. This is also why I don't know why we do all these drafts this early. I'm going to be honest with you. I know the industry people do this. This makes no sense. This makes no sense at all. We have not seen them in any formation. We have not seen them work with each other. We're barely getting camp reports finally this week. A lot can change, actually. And so I'm a believer in preseason. I'm alone, I guess. And everyone just goes off of their numbers and projections. Do you know that we have Russell Wilson projected to be the 29th most pass attempts next year?
29th?
That's a fun
29th.
fact.
That's pretty low, but he's been around 500 now for a few years. I see it ramping up a little bit, but yeah, 29th.
He's never even had a game where he's 29th in attempts, ever.
Really?
There you go.
In the last 3 years, yeah.
Fun fact.
Wow.
See?
That is a fun fact.
There you go.
He stayed healthy, yeah. Now, Matt Jones, talking about him, there's a lot of running back situations around the league where, it's almost like by default they have value, and Matt Jones is one of those guys. You look at the Redskins last year, the running backs carried the ball around 325 times. You figure it's going to be a slight bump because they really didn't use the running backs much. I mean, Matt Jones wasn't really healthy for much of the year, and Alfred Morris just wasn't that good. He actually, what's really interesting about Alfred Morris, if you go back and look at his splits with and without Robert Griffin III, he was a completely different running back. He played so much better with the threat of RG3 kind of running the ball. But Matt Jones, I think, was a little bit, honestly, a lot of people kind of wrote him off too early. He's a really, really young guy. And unless you think that Chris Thompson is going to touch the ball over 150 times, I think that you have to consider Matt Jones as a top 25 option. Now, am I excited when I draft Matt Jones? Not really. But when you get in that area of that 20 to 30 running back range, there's nobody that's really going to excite you. You're taking those running backs inside the top 20. So I'm okay with taking Matt Jones if you are wide receiver heavy. I mean, preferably, if there's a flex spot, but not your RB2. But like I said, if you project Chris Thompson, to touch the ball over 150 times, then we have to start looking at Chris Thompson as a guy that can provide like a Theo Riddick type value out of that offense, because these guys are not going to see many 8-man fronts. With the receiving options they have there, it opens things up. With Kirk Cousins throwing the ball the way he has been, the running backs, it is a situation that, it could work out. So I'm not opposed to Matt Jones, no.
He's going anywhere between the 3rd and 7th round. Huge variance there, according to Fantasy Football calculators. So if you're getting the 7th round, yeah, you should be excited. That's right, I said excited. That's the only time that you're really excited. The other times you're kind of like, well, it fell to me. You know, it's the fifth round.
And I think that's about right because, I mean, you're drafting a starter, right? I mean, to begin the season, that's the bottom line. So third round, probably a little high. But yeah, like you said, Brandon, seventh round, that's great. But I do want to read a quote today that I found interesting from the Redskins general manager who called the Washington backfield a two-headed monster with Matt Jones and Keith Marshall. So do we put any stock in that, or is that just, narrative street, coach speak, etc.?
I don't think so. I heard that Keith Marshall, like even those that went out to practice, I know that Carl Safchek, I was watching his Twitter feed, that Keith Marshall wasn't really rotating with the starters. He wasn't there. There was actually a rumor this offseason that Keith Marshall had a chance to be cut because he just didn't look that good. So I'm not buying into the coach speak. A lot of times rookie running backs are often overrated, even wide receivers for that matter, but I'm not really buying into it. I think Matt Jones, it's hard to get into a rhythm, and they never used him really consistently last year. And like I said, he was playing hurt with, I think it was a lower body injury, so that can really affect a running back. So I'm not too worried about Keith Marshall.
Okay. Well, and it's like you said, Brennan. I mean, that's why we need to watch preseason. That's why they need to play the games. They need to play the game.
If Keith Marshall goes out there and kills it for, an entire quarter or something, and they start second-guessing themselves, maybe, but he's going to have to kill it, I think. Not just have a good play like Amir Abdullah, but having a good quarter. And also, I mean, we should also probably talk about, how to watch preseason games. It also means that if something were to happen to Matt Jones, if we did see a good performance by Keith Marshall, you could feel more confident starting him in his stead if that, situation would ever arise. But no, I think contrary to what we wanted, I think Jeremy Langford and Matt Jones and all those guys that we, were hoping weren't going to be there are there, and we're going to have to kind of come to terms with that.
Yeah.
All right. Well, let's go to another interesting running back situation. That would be in Oakland, where Latavius Murray, incumbent, is trying to fight off DeAndre Washington, the rookie drafted in the, I think, 5th round this year. Yeah, that's right. So, Mike, let's start with you first. I mean, you've got Latavius Murray. He put up running back one numbers last year, but there was a lot of doubt heading into the offseason and even to the regular season now that he's still the focus of the running game there. Are you buying him this year?
Yeah, I actually, as we ramp up to the season, I'm starting to come around more and more on Latavius Murray. I was a big fan of him a couple of years ago, and it's funny because I remember when he had that breakout game against the Chiefs, and I was like, hey, it's about time. And they're like, yeah, just jump on the bandwagon like everybody else. And I was like, no. Like, you can go back, and I actually went through my timeline. It was a year prior. I had said something about Latavius Murray in deeper leagues that's stashing him. So I've liked Latavius Murray for quite some time. He really, really disappointed last year. But this is a team that has an improved defense. You're going to see even more carries to go around. So when you start projecting DeAndre Washington stealing some carries, that's fine. But DeAndre Washington, again, he's a rookie, and I'm never putting too much stock into this. I actually read a report today. Someone went out to Raiders camp thinking that they'd be taken away by DeAndre Washington, but they said Latavius Murray was the one that really stood out, that he looks like he's just a different player on the field. I think that can happen with a second-year running back, to know that they didn't invest huge capital in DeAndre Washington, so I think he's more of a pass-catching back this year. He'll probably start out with somewhere, that 4 to 6 touches per game area. But Latavius Murray, the reason you loved him last year was because you were getting volume, and I don't think that goes away this year, especially with an improved defense that's going to allow them to run the ball even more.
So, Brandon, does that mean low-end running back 1 for you, or is he squarely in the running back 2 conversation?
I think he has the potential to be a low-end running back 1, absolutely. I think that he's much maligned, and I'm not entirely sure if that's justified. The Oakland Raiders, they were very up and down as a team last season, and we're not saying the same things about Amari Cooper. We're not saying the same things about Derek Carr. Their entire offense was like a roller coaster, and I think that this year they're going to make some adjustments in general. But yeah, I've been hearing good things as well from a lot of the beat writers from Oakland. I think, again, we're looking at the things that we project sometimes, and I think we need to also, it's really, you have to be open for change. And I think that, listen, if I'm a Latavius Murray owner and I can get Washington later in the draft, I'll probably do that at this time of year. I think that's the smart thing to do. But at the same time, I just think that we've kind of overblown what we think is going on there. The guy had over 1,000 rushing yards last year, 41 catches. That's not terrible. Was it pretty? No. Does it have to be? No.
Well, and I think, and you touched on this, Mike. I mean, the fact that the whole Oakland offense kind of suffered in the last half, to me, that kind of gives hope that, hey, it wasn't just one guy there that was suffering, right? Like they all were, which means, hey, they could have been gassed towards the end of the season. Whatever reason you want to conjure up, but the point is, they're all coming back. They all had the whole off season to sort of regroup, rest, etc. And yeah, I mean he's the starter. There's no doubt about it. He's not going anywhere.
No, and on top of that, more is that we have Oakland graded going into the season as the number 2 run blocking offensive line, right behind the Dallas Cowboys. So that's another thing just to love.
Yeah, well, and yeah, that's what I was going to touch on. They made some signings in free agency for the offensive line specifically. So yeah, I think you can't deny the volume. I mean, it's like we talked about with Matt Jones, except Latavius Murray, is probably a little better than Matt Jones. But anyway. All right, so let's get to some quarterback situations that are super dicey at the moment. First, let's go to Denver, where I don't know if we want to say the unthinkable has happened, but it kind of has. So Mark Sanchez is now, I guess, co-starter with Mr. Simeon in Denver. I don't know, Brandon, let's go to you first. A, who wins that battle, and B, does it matter?
I got called out on Twitter for my article about a month ago saying I thought it was going to be Trevor Siemian, and I'm telling you right now, this is such a Broncos move. This is such an Elway and Kubiak move. These are the guys that also said, listen, Brock Osweiler's the starter. Sorry, Peyton. If you're telling Peyton Manning sorry, you have no problem telling Mark Sanchez sorry. I mean, come on now. So I think do I think it's a done deal? No, I don't. And I think Mark Sanchez gets a really heinous rap for the butt fumble, and maybe deservedly so. But Trevor Siemian wasn't even good in college. But he has worked very hard on the Denver Broncos. He's worked a lot with Peyton Manning. He has been an extremely good teammate. He has a Super Bowl ring. Yes, he does. He was in a uniform and there, and that's something to be said. I mean, they like him there. They really do. And he has put in a lot of work. Now, my sister went to camp last week in Denver. It was really great. She sat in the. She has picked. Whoops.
Say that again, Brandon.
Oh, sorry, I got a little muted there. But she has Demaryius Thomas actually took pictures, and so did Von Miller and everything with her kids and stuff. She got to be VIP. It was very cool at Broncos camp. She said it looked very clear to her that Mark Sanchez was the best quarterback. She thinks that maybe this is a way that they're motivating him. But supposedly on Saturday, Trevor Siemian just knocked it out of the park. I think there's a possibility for both of those scenarios, but I definitely think it's something you need to watch. And either way, both Emmanuel Sanders and Demaryius Thomas had over 1,000 yards last year, with Peyton Manning being terrible. Now, they only had 6 touchdowns apiece, but if that's I don't think they're going to be worse than Peyton Manning, either of them. So I actually think that you can get those guys for a fire sale.
That's another thing, Mike, that a lot of people are talking about is Demaryius Thomas and what, if any, effect this is going to have on him. And like you said, Brandon, he still did pretty good with very, very bad quarterback play last year. So
1,300 yards, 7th most in the league.
Yeah. So, Mike, is he, can he do that again with this quarterback situation going on?
I think this is more saying about how bad Mark Sanchez has looked rather than how good Simeon's looked. I think Sanchez is going to start until Paxton Lynch is ready. If that's worth anything, just as a veteran presence, I think when it comes down to that, that's the tiebreaker. But for me, does it matter for Demaryius Thomas? Not really. As Brandon said, yes, with the numbers he put up with Peyton Manning last year, but his targets were significant. Like, his target level was through the roof, and a lot of people, before I started my projections this year, I wanted to say, yeah, well, he was fine with Peyton Manning and Brock Osweiler last year, but at the same time, this offense is not going to run the same way it did last year. I see the pass attempts taking a very big dip. I think Demaryius is still above the 140 target mark, right in that range, so I think he's a solid wide receiver too. I think he's got a high floor. I really do, just because of the volume that he's looking at. He's a possession receiver at this point in his career. He's not a downfield guy, so I'm not really worried too much about the quarterback situation. But me, it's about the ceiling. I just don't think that Demaryius Thomas offers that top 3 wide receiver ceiling that he offered when Peyton Manning was actually really good. So for me, Demaryius Thomas is a boring fantasy pick. Not to say that he's not going to provide wide receiver 2 numbers, because he probably will. He's just going to be a very boring pick that, that's the best way I could describe it. Just boring pick. 70 yards and a touchdown every other game, maybe. It's just going to be a boring pick.
Yeah. But he's going in the 3rd round. The good news is you don't have to draft him like he's a stud anymore. Now he's just like a guy.
Sammy Watkins in the 3rd round. I'll take him all day.
Well, yeah.
I'll take Carlos Hyde over Demaryius Thomas.
Oh, that's a hot take.
That could be a whole other.
I just got burned.
That could be a whole other. Don't surprise us with these hot takes, Mike. We don't know how to.
Whoa.
Anyway, okay. Well, let's go to a decidedly less, a cooler take, if you will. So we did get some clarity in Cleveland. Robert Griffin III named the starter. Not a real surprise. That was expected. But I know, Brandon, we have to do this. We have to. So,
this is an occupational hazard right here, having to talk about it.
Well, and it kind of ties into, sort of the bigger subject of the late quarterback debate. Is there anything there with Robert Griffin being a late quarterback, or is it strictly streamer backup material?
I think there's some value there. I mean, when you talk about RG3, you have to assume that he's going to run the ball. They're not going to take away his legs, because it's not like he's a pocket passer. You can't turn him into that. The guy's head was so messed up. And I know, Brandon, you talked about, and we don't want to talk about RG3 and all that stuff, but at the same time, this is like one of those stories in sports that it could be one of those feel-good stories, like where Robert Griffin head got way too big, when he was drafted, that he had Rookie of the Year season. Like the guy was really, really good his rookie year. I think people forget about that. But he has been out of the league for a few years now. He hasn't really done anything, but from all reports, he looks really good. Really good. I watched a few highlights from the practice, and he still got the whole flick of the wrist throwing it 60 yards down the field, which kind of fits Corey Coleman and Josh Gordon, like what they can do. Those two are big playmakers. I'm intrigued. I'm rooting for RG3. I think that's my biggest thing, is like, this is where I become a fan and less of an analyst, because I have no idea how he's going to operate in Hugh Jackson's offense. They're very run heavy typically, but I'm rooting for him. I'm rooting for the guy just because I like to see like that comeback story, and I don't know. That's the fan in me for RG3.
Okay, Brandon, rain on Mike's parade.
I mean, fine. I hope you feel good. Okay.
Okay, perfect.
I know this is the best analysis I've ever done. I feel like I hope this isn't a Josh Freeman situation. I hope this isn't. I mean, we've had so many bad examples. I mean, when was the last really good comeback story of someone who was a big star that came back and then was great again? I guess Michael Vick.
Yeah, I guess Vick. Yeah.
Oh, Vick. Yeah. Okay.
But he actually was in prison. Just
quite the comeback.
Well, hold on a second.
He didn't lose his starting position to Kirk Cousins.
Didn't we establish that RG3 was in Mike Shanahan's basement? Isn't that kind of like prison?
Well,
pretty much.
Or in the Kyle Shanahan offense. Can I get a what?
Well, and but Mike, I kind of touched on what you were talking about. I mean, I think there is a little bit of a factor of the whole, like, all eyes on him in Washington. Like, he couldn't do, unless he came back and like won a Super Bowl, people were just going to not like him, like, no matter what he did. So with Cleveland, let's face it, there's nowhere to go but up. There's literally nowhere to go but up. I mean, the expectations are super low. You do have some talent there, so it's not completely barren of guys around him. So
Terrell Pryor.
Well, yeah, there you go. Well, and we can cover that a little later, because I did get sniped on our Dynasty startup on that. But I digress. So, all right. Well, let's take a quick break. We have covered a lot of ground so far, but we'll take a very quick break and be right back and talk about our Dynasty startup strategy. All right. Welcome back, everyone. As Mike mentioned earlier, he dragged me and Brandon kicking and screaming into his new Dynasty Startup League. Mike, remind us of the settings and the rosters and all the particulars on that.
Yeah, we went on to 14-team because there was a lot of interest in the league, and unfortunately I couldn't let everybody in that wanted to, but I extended it as much as I could to a 14-team league, 38 roster spots. So it's funny because we have Nathan from PFF in the league, and Nathan tracks all of our players. He's like our best analysis that we have on PFF, and he knows every single player in this league, and he said basically by the time we get to the end of this draft that we're going to be drafting defensive players, he thinks, even though it's not an IDP. He thinks he's going to take J.J. Watt and kind of plug him in as a tight end or something like that at sometimes. But we're starting deep starters. 3 running backs, 4 wide receivers, 2 flex, and a tight end, and a quarterback and a defense. But, yeah, no kickers.
Thank God. All right. So, Brandon, what was your strategy going in? You had the 11th overall pick, and knowing that it was very wide receiver heavy, you didn't go wide receiver in the first round.
No, I didn't. I went Le'Veon Bell, right? No, I went Rob Gronkowski. Oh my gosh, sorry. Yes, I went Rob Gronkowski because it's a PPR league and I will want to start him no matter what. The thing is that there's so many starters that I also kind of felt like, geez, I'd like to have someone that I feel really good about. So I just think Rob Gronkowski's, if I'm doing a dynasty league, he's still in his 20s. He's arguably the best tight end that's ever played the game as far as fantasy is concerned. I just didn't see there were any problems there. And by the time I got to that 11th pick, I didn't love any running backs. I didn't love the wide receivers. And I was like, he's the number 1 guy at his position, and I wanted to have one of those at the start.
Yeah, and honestly, I was looking at your team, Brandon, and you started with Gronk, and then you took Le'Veon in the second, which is really, really risky considering that we start 4 wide receivers. But knowing who you got in the 3rd round before me, I was so mad because I was picking. I'm in the 13 hole, and when you're looking at a 14-team league, that is an awful spot to be in a dynasty. In dynasty, you want the earlier the better. That's what you want. But I'm okay with her taking Gronk, and then the Le'Veon thing. I debated Le'Veon. Don't get me wrong, but I got David Johnson and Des Bryant. I can't complain out of those 2 where I was at, but you got Michael Floyd in the 3rd round, and it was like the end of the 3rd round, so I think that was a steal. I think Michael Floyd, depending on where he goes this offseason, can be a legitimate top 5 wide receiver. If he goes to Green Bay, he is a top 5 wide receiver, and I'm banking on that to happen, actually. I hope it does. I really do. So it was risky, but it kind of paid off. Me personally, I think I was the last guy to take a quarterback. I'm not typically a totally late-round quarterback guy, but with how deep these rosters are, and if you're out there listening and you're trying to find a way to separate yourself from your league mates because there's so much parity in the NFL, when you're in a 10 or a 12-team league, it's hard to separate the skill gap between you and another team that just picks up a magazine or looks on our website before your league begins. But if you add more and more players into your starting rosters, it's going to eliminate a lot of that luck that kind of goes involved with it. So if you have one injury during a week, it's not necessarily going to tank your entire team, and then you have depth on your team to back it up. So that was the idea with this league, to have as deep as possible and let skill shine through. So I loaded up on wide receiver and running back, taking one with, I believe it was each of my first 9 picks, maybe 10, were running backs and wide receivers. And then I backed it up with Delaney Walker, and I know it's a short-term fix, but it's fine. It's a PPR. And I got Matt Ryan, and I recently picked up Tom Brady in like the 14th round. So Matt Ryan and Tom Brady, I'll be fine. I think Tom Brady's the stopgap, and then Matt Ryan, I still believe he's a top 12 fantasy dynasty quarterback.
Well, and you touched on something, Mike, that I think is important, especially for startup drafts, which is try to do something, obviously go for your guys and all that stuff, but try to do something a little different because, with 14 teams especially, you're going to have to be unique a little bit. So on that front, like you said, Brandon, you got Gronk at the 11th pick. He was 12th in receiving yards last year, like in the NFL.
Yeah,
like
NFL,
amongst receivers.
exactly.
And he's a tight end. I mean, that is, and obviously we know Gronk is great, but that's such a clear, level ahead of the next best tight end that you're almost compelled to get a guy that's far and away above the next guy to his position, because you have that position on lockdown every week now for the next 5 years or so, right?
Right, and like anyone can tear an ACL. Life happens. But at the end of the day, right now I don't have another tight end yet. I feel fine. And the problem with dynasty leagues is that tight ends take so long to mature that it's not something that you really want to be like going for a rookie necessarily because they're not going to be able to produce. So I can take a couple rookies in the next couple of years and one of them will hit, but I can take the time to let them develop instead of having to rush them onto my roster because Antonio Gates is definitely dying. It's like,
right.
his NFL career.
He's 36.
I mean,
36.
listen,
That's
I'm the
crazy.
biggest Antonio Gates fan out there. I'm getting him in all my redrafts. But in a dynasty, if you did that, you would have to then take let's say
Will tie.
gosh, yeah, Will Tye. That's a great example. Or hope that Clive Walford hits. But still, he hit at the end of last season. But we're not quite sure exactly what that role is going to be. So it gets a little dicey out there for tight ends. So I decided, you know what? If I can shore that up in a dynasty, that's the way to go for me.
Yeah, and
especially the 11th pick.
No, yeah, and he just turned 27, so you have a good solid, as long as Gronk stays healthy, I think you got a good solid 7 years left out of him. So when you're talking about a dynasty, 7 years at elite production, like that guy when he's healthy, he's the #1 tight end. There is no contender right now.
And like a top 15 receiver if he wanted to be.
Pretty much. Pretty much. The only question is, the question I would have, I guess, is how much difference does Brady make in making him that so far and away tight end guy? You know what I mean? I believe the talent transcends through quarterbacks, but Brady has to give him a slight bump, right?
Oh, yeah. No, I mean, of course. I mean, there's no comparison. However, I do believe that Bill Belichick, it was the same thing with Greg Olsen. Remember when David Anderson was playing? Greg Olsen's the #1 receiver on that team, and I feel the same way about Gronkowski. So they're going to say, all right, we're going to run the ball, or you're going to throw it to Gronk. Maybe Julian Edelman, but that's it. Right. That's what you do with those backup guys, right? That's why sometimes a wide receiver 1 actually gets a bump, at least in targets, because they're like, just throw to him. Just throw to him. He'll make it happen. He'll make it happen. And I think that's what Rob Gronkowski is for Jimmy Garoppolo. They have a tough schedule this year. This is really about looking ahead. I actually hate the Patriots' schedule this year. They play the NFC West, which is just a complete nightmare as far as defense is concerned. They play the Denver Broncos. In fact, during the playoffs, it's the Broncos and the Jets that they play. It's tough stuff for them. So even when Brady's back, it's going to be hard. But still, again, he is always top 3. So how many players can you say that about?
Yeah, it's a rare thing. But can we take a second to acknowledge how good of a job Moore has done here?
Finally. His team, I was waiting for that.
Moore, your team is built to last for like 2 years. I'll give you that.
Right.
But he's got a good window. If you want to go through and talk about your picks more, I'd love to hear that.
Well, yeah, and actually, I was going to ask you, Brandon, because I think you and I may have had the same strategy, because you've got a lot of veterans, you've got a lot of guys that are pretty solid in their position on their teams, and that's kind of what I look for too. I mean, believe me, I am not a risky dynasty player. I'm a lot more conservative than probably a lot of folks. So, I had the 4th pick. Went with Julio Jones. Not much of a thought there. I tried to make it much of a thought. I tried to trade out of it, but Mike convinced me otherwise. And then the next round, let's see what I got. Round 2, which was technically the 11th pick. I went Lamar Miller at running back, which, I'm pretty happy with that. I think he's just going to get a ton of carries. He's the focal point of the offense now. He just is. And look, as we've mentioned even on this episode, Brock Osweiler is not that great. So they're going to have to do something to move the ball, and that's Lamar Miller. And he's still 25. I mean, people forget, even though he's played a few seasons, he's still a young guy, and he didn't run that much in Miami. So there's a lot of tread left on those tires. So, as my #1 running back, and honestly, I would get kind of skittish if I didn't have a running back in the first 2 rounds, which is completely old school. And yes, we start 5 receivers or whatever it is, but it made me nervous. So with Miller still there, I mean, I was okay with that. And honestly, he was probably the only running back I would have been okay doing that with. I mean, you had Carlos Hyde after that, Mark Ingram at running back, and that was about it as far as that tier goes. I mean, everything after that was a pretty big drop-off. So,
I love the Lamar Miller pick. And by the way, Mike, if you're looking to win now, I think you should trade Julio Jones to me, because I don't think he's hit his prime yet. I think.
You know what? I had doubts on that. So if you want to just send me like a 2nd or 3rd rounder next year, that probably is equitable, and I'm probably okay with that.
I'll send you Tom Brady.
I'm surprised that's what you're asking. Oh yeah, Tom Brady. That's a good one.
That's what I'm going to send you, Tom Brady.
Just wait till week 5, and then we'll call it even.
I thought you were going to freak out about his Kobe Fleener pick.
Oh, I was. I was not happy inside. I'm just going to say that. I was hoping Fleener would fall, but
I was pretty proud of that. I'm not going to lie. I was pretty proud of that.
You should be.
Let's see.
Your
What
team is
round?
really good.
What round was that in? That was round not 5, but
it was probably around the 5th. I would think that you took him. I would think it was the 4th or 5th.
Yeah. Okay, you're right. It was 5th. I had Julian Edelman, another veteran.
Yeah.
6 was Deshaun Jackson. Oh, 7th. Round 7th, Mike. See?
That's when you got Fleener? Oh, that's
you
right.
You had plenty of chances.
I was busy loading up on wide receivers, and you guys should have seen. Like, if I could go through and count, I'm pretty sure that there was 60 wide receivers gone before there was 15 running backs gone. Like, the wide receivers were flying off the board. Now we're to the point where Terrell Pryor is being drafted in, like, the 13th round.
Hey, I almost traded back in to get him, so don't knock it till you try it.
This is nuts. This is nuts.
Well, and that sort of speaks to the point, though, Mike. Like, you really have to, for any league, be very aware of what the roster settings are in the starting lineups. Because, as you said, you've got a ton of receivers you're starting. So that's pretty important. I mean, you can't necessarily go 0 wide receiver, or else you're going to be at a severe disadvantage. So, Mike, what about your strategy? You sort of have a mixture of young and old guys on your team.
That's how I usually look at dynasties. Like, you want to have a chance to win now, especially when we're talking about in a 14-team league. There's so much that can happen around injuries and even projections. We're not always right on the players when we talk about coming out of college. So I tend to avoid the really, really young players because there's a lot of unknowns. There's a lot of question marks. I recently did a piece for PFF talking about the value of a dynasty draft pick. And, when you talk about a first-round draft pick and you're using that, and we're talking a top end. So if you're saying it's a top 6 dynasty first-round draft pick, the average outcome is Eric Decker's career. Now, not to say that Eric Decker is great or that he's bad, but I'm also saying that he's not an elite player. You're not guaranteed an elite player with a top 6 dynasty pick. And if you stretch that out to, you don't know where the first round pick is, it's worth less. Second round isn't worth very much. So I'm always about trying to stay in the competition now, but at least have a few guys that are 25 to 27 that are your foundation. They're the ones that you know are going to produce while taking shots elsewhere. But in dynasties, I always look at like a 5-year window. I'm not looking for too far down the future, like, maybe like a Jared Goff or something like that. That's why I felt like Matt Ryan paired with Tom Brady, I think that's a fine 5-year window.
Brandon, what about you? What's your general strategy when doing a dynasty startup? And don't just say pick the good players, please. Okay.
I try to pick players that I want to play with. No, I've tried to find people that are a little bit sneaky. For instance, Ruben Randall is like the least sexy pick ever, but do you know he's only 25 years old?
Yeah, and he had 90 targets last year, and probably will match that again. And
someone has to do something in Philadelphia. First of all, the Jordan Matthews hate has gone way too far. I'm going to say that now, and I will say that on multiple shows. But I think that there's going to be someone else that's going to emerge, and I think it's possibly going to be Ruben Randall. Yeah. We still don't know what's going on with Nelson Aguilar, and I know that he's got all this buzz going on and everything else, but he also has some issues that are going on right now too, and I'm a little concerned. So, you want to kind of look for some sneaky people, but for me, I actually wanted to look for the Eric Decker types. I have Eric Decker on my team, actually, and Michael Crabtree, and guys that are going to produce every week, because the problem is a lot of people, if you look at their rosters, they only have like 4 wide receivers total. Something happens, they're not even going to have someone to play.
Yeah, right.
There's literally no one to play because we have starting on the roster.
Yeah, they're going to be starting Jeff Janis, and it's not going to be good. Yeah. All right, so real quick, and we will wrap this up. So, Mike, your favorite pick, from this dynasty startup. Sorry, I didn't mean that. I didn't mean that. I really didn't.
I'm sorry, I'm dying. All right, so my favorite pick from the draft. Let me take a look at my team. Honestly, it was probably the Thomas Rawls pick. I think I got him. It was late. It was getting later and later, and I felt like there was a time where you have to kind of take a chance. And this was before Rawls came off the PUP list. It was more of like a risk-reward move. I want to say I got Rawls in like the 5th round, and it's a 14 team, so keep that in mind. And that we're starting 3 running backs. So my 3 running backs, I have David Johnson, Thomas Rawls, and then Jeremy Hill. So I feel like my running backs are great. My wide receivers are good, but Thomas Rawls was probably my favorite pick because he offers legitimate top 5 running back upside.
All right, Brandon, favorite pick of your dynasty startup?
I think that it's a tie, I think, because I love Giovanni Bernard in the 5th. Because this is a PPR league, but I also think that DeMarco Murray in the 7th is going to be a good stopgap this year. I think 7th round. That's really late. Now, I'm not saying that he's going to be there forever or that Derrick Henry isn't the future, but I think that for this year, you can't really argue with that. And again, people are so high or low on age. I got Matt Forte in the 10th.
Yeah.
Wow.
And look, he's going to play. I mean, no matter how many, even if it's split, he's going to play. So.
Yeah, and again, we start so many people. To have people that are playmakers on the team, regardless of their age or their future, is really helpful in the first year, because then you can kind of make assess everyone else on your team. But it was really nice to get those running backs that late.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and that was sort of the theme of this draft. So, for example, my favorite pick, probably Doug Martin in the 4th as my second running back. Like, I'm okay with that. That's not a very high draft pick. And yes, he's 27, but look, he's on his setting offense. He's the starter. Charles Sims isn't going to take away carries, so it's all good.
Right.
All right. Well, that will do it for this edition of the Fantasy Slant. I'm your host, Michael Moore, along with Brandon, Marianne Lee, and Mike Tagliere, and we will see you next time.